The text came late at night. Sweetheart, we need to talk about the trip. We've decided to postpone it until next year. I blinked at the message, my heart sinking. Postponed? We'd been planning this trip for months, our first family vacation in years. I'd rearranged my work schedule, budgeted every penny, and counted down the days like a kid waiting for Christmas. I called my mom immediately. She sighed as she answered, Alyssa, I know you're disappointed, but things are just tight right now. We can't afford it. I swallowed hard. I understood money struggles. I really did. I had been working extra shifts at the cafe just to pitch in for this trip, even offering to cover my own airfare. But something about the way she said it, like the decision had already been made, like my feelings didn't matter, felt like a slap in the face. I took a breath. If it's about money, maybe we can find a cheaper hotel or shorten the trip. She hesitated, just for a second, but I heard it. Alyssa, she said gently, it's just not the right time. We'll make it happen next year, I promise. A promise. One I should have known better than to believe. 2 days later, I was scrolling through Facebook on my lunch break when my stomach dropped. There it was. A picture of my mom and dad, on a beach. My heart pounded as I stared at the screen. Sun-kissed skin, drinks in their hands, the ocean stretching behind them, glistening under the afternoon sun. I swallowed hard and scrolled down. More photos. My brother Jake posing with his girlfriend on a boat. My parents at a seafood restaurant, smiling over plates of lobster. And then the caption that made my blood run cold. Family time is priceless. Family time. Except I wasn't there. Because according to them, the trip had been postponed. I locked my phone and sat frozen at the cafe counter, my mind racing. I wanted to believe there was an explanation. Maybe it was a last-minute work thing. Maybe someone had gifted them the trip. But deep down, I knew the truth. They hadn't postponed anything. They had just decided that I wasn't part of it. That night, I didn't call my mom. I didn't respond to the post. Instead, I watched in silence as more photos poured in over the next few days. They went snorkeling. They had bonfires on the beach. They made memories. Without me. And as I stared at each picture, something inside me shifted. This wasn't just about the trip. This was about all the times I had been the afterthought. All the birthdays they had forgotten. All the holidays where my gifts were an afterthought while Jake got exactly what he wanted. All the times I made sacrifices for them, but they never did the same for me. I clenched my jaw and took a deep breath. They thought I would be too hurt to say anything, that I would just let it go. But this time, I was done being the forgotten one. They didn't know I had seen the photos, so when they got home a week later, I was waiting for them, and I had a plan. I heard the taxi pull into the driveway and watched from the kitchen window as my mom, dad, and Jake stepped out, dragging their suitcases behind them. They looked tired but happy, sun-kissed from their postponed trip. I clenched my jaw, forcing myself to stay calm. They didn't know I had seen the photos. Not yet. The front door swung open, and my mom was the first to spot me. "Alyssa," she said, her voice overly bright. "Oh, sweetheart, I missed you. How have you been?" I folded my arms. "Busy," I said flatly. My dad walked in behind her, setting his bags down. "That's good. How's work?" I let out a short, bitter laugh. Work. That was all I had done. Work and scroll through their pictures while pretending I didn't exist to them. Jake yawned, stretching his arms. "Man, I'm exhausted. Traveling takes it out of you." He turned to me with a smirk. "Hope you held down the fort while we were gone." My eyes snapped to him. While we were gone. Like it was normal. Like nothing was wrong. Like I hadn't spent the last week replaying their betrayal over and over. I took a deep breath. No more pretending. I turned to my mom, my voice eerily calm. "So, how was the trip?" She blinked, hesitating. "Oh, well, we just needed a little getaway. Nothing too special." Liar. I pulled out my phone, unlocked it, and turned the screen toward them. The photo album, the beach selfie, the boat ride, the fancy dinner, and the caption that made my stomach turn all over again. Family time is priceless. I tilted my head. Looks special to me. Silence. Thick, heavy silence. Then, my mom let out a nervous laugh. Alyssa, Don't. My voice was sharp, cold. Just don't. My dad cleared his throat. Look, sweetheart, it wasn't. Stop, I said, my voice rising. Just tell me the truth. You never postponed the trip. You just didn't want me there. I saw the guilt flash across my mom's face, but she quickly masked it with a weak excuse. It wasn't like that, honey. We just thought, what? That I wouldn't notice? I snapped. That I wouldn't see the pictures? That I'd be stupid enough to believe your lie? Jake groaned, rolling his eyes. Oh my God, Alyssa, are you seriously making this a big deal? It was just a trip. Just a trip. The words hit me like a slap. That I planned, that I saved up for, that I was supposed to be a part of. I shook my head. You could have told me the truth, but instead, you lied. You made me feel like I wasn't worth bringing. Jake scoffed. You're being dramatic. I let out a bitter laugh. No, Jake, I'm finally being honest. My mom stepped forward, reaching for my hand. Alyssa, please. I pulled away. Not this time. They needed to hear this. This isn't just about the trip. It's about every single time I've been treated like I don't matter. Every holiday where Jake got exactly what he wanted, and I got whatever was convenient. Every time I put you guys first and you didn't even notice. I swallowed, my voice shaking. I thought if I worked hard enough, if I gave enough, I'd finally be enough for you. But I never was I? No one said a word. Finally, my mom sighed. Alyssa, it's not like we love Jake more than you. I let out a small, bitter smile. Maybe you don't, but it sure feels that way. Another silence. And that was my answer. I nodded, exhaling sharply. Got it. Then, without another word, I grabbed my purse and walked toward the door. Alyssa, where are you going? My dad called. I didn't look back. Somewhere I'm actually wanted. And then I left. For the first time in my life, I put myself first. For days, my phone wouldn't stop buzzing with messages from them, but I was done fixing things. This time, they could figure it out without me. I didn't answer their calls. I didn't respond to their messages. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't rushing to fix things. It was strange at first, ignoring them. The guilt crept in like an old habit, whispering in the back of my mind. Maybe you're overreacting. Maybe you should just let it go. But then, I would remember. The text saying the trip was postponed. The Facebook posts of them having fun without me. The lie they told without a second thought. And suddenly, the silence felt like freedom. By the fifth day, their messages had shifted. At first, they had been firm and dismissive, trying to regain control of the situation. Mom, Alyssa, we need to talk about this. You're making this into a bigger deal than it needs to be. Dad, ignoring us isn't going to change anything. Call your mother. Jake, Jesus, Alyssa, get over it. You're acting like a child. I rolled my eyes. Classic. They weren't sorry. They just wanted me to stop making them uncomfortable. But when I didn't answer, the tone of their messages shifted. Mom, sweetheart, please. We miss you. We never meant to hurt you. Dad, we should have handled things differently. Let's talk. And then, the one that nearly got me. Mom, Alyssa, I feel awful. I can't sleep knowing you're upset with us. For a brief moment, I almost responded. Almost. But then I asked myself a question. If I had never seen the photos, would they have ever told me the truth? Would they have ever felt guilty at all? The answer was painfully clear. So I locked my phone and let the silence continue. It wasn't easy. I had spent years being the one to reach out first, the one who smoothed things over, the one who made excuses for them. So sitting with the silence, holding my boundary, felt unnatural at first. But as the days passed, I realized something. They weren't reaching out because they missed me. They were reaching out because they missed the role I played in their lives. The fixer, the peacekeeper, the afterthought who never made waves. And now that I was refusing to be that person, they didn't know what to do. A week after their return, I did something I had never done before. I booked a weekend trip for myself. Nothing extravagant, just a quiet cabin in the mountains, far away from everything. I packed a bag, grabbed my keys, and left, without telling anyone where I was going. For once, I wasn't asking for permission. I wasn't waiting to be included. I was just living for myself, and it felt amazing. By the time I got back, my phone was full of missed calls and texts, but I didn't rush to respond. I wasn't ready yet, because for the first time in my life, I was finally putting myself first, and I wanted to enjoy the feeling a little longer. They weren't used to me ignoring them, so when my silence lasted longer than they expected, they showed up at my door, and I was ready. I knew it was coming. The moment I ignored their calls, their messages, their guilt trips, I knew my parents wouldn't just let it go. So when I heard the knock on my door that Saturday afternoon, I wasn't surprised. I took a deep breath, setting down my coffee. My hands weren't shaking. My heart wasn't racing. I was ready. I opened the door to find my mom and dad standing on my porch. They looked different. Not angry, not smug, not demanding. They looked nervous. "Alyssa," my mom said softly, tucking her purse under her arm. "Can we come in?" I leaned against the doorframe. "Depends," I said evenly. "Are you here to actually listen, or just to tell me why I'm wrong for being upset?" My dad sighed. "We're here to talk, really talk." I studied their faces. They weren't ordering me to let them in. They weren't dismissing my feelings like they had in their messages. They were asking. That was new. I stepped aside. "Fine," I said. "Come in." I led them into the living room. The air felt thick with things unsaid. My mom sat on the couch, hands folded in her lap. My dad stayed standing, like he wasn't sure if he belonged. I sat across from them, arms crossed, waiting. It was my mom who finally spoke first. "I don't know where to start," she admitted. "The truth is a good place," I said flatly. She flinched. My dad exhaled through his nose. "We messed up." I blinked. I hadn't expected him to say that. My mom looked down at her hands. "Alyssa, when we said the trip was postponed, it was a lie. No excuses, no dancing around it, just the truth." I swallowed, my throat tight. "Why?" She hesitated, then finally said, "We thought it would be easier." Easier. Just like she had texted me. I clenched my jaw. "Easier for who?" Silence. "For you?" I pressed. "For Jake?" I let out a bitter laugh. "Because it sure as hell wasn't easier for me." My dad ran a hand over his face. "We didn't think it would hurt you this much," I scoffed. "You didn't think at all." My mom's voice cracked. "We thought you'd understand." Understand. The same word they had used in their messages. The word that meant nothing. I leaned forward. "Tell me the truth. If I hadn't seen those pictures, would you have ever told me?" Neither of them spoke. That was my answer. I swallowed the lump in my throat and forced my voice to stay steady. "Do you have any idea what that felt like? To see you all having fun without me? To know that I was never even considered?" My mom's eyes shimmered with guilt. "Alyssa, we love you." I shook my head. "You don't treat people you love like that." My dad sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "We failed you, sweetheart. We should have been honest." I stared at him, then at my mom. "Why are you really here?" I asked. "To apologize? Or to make yourselves feel better?" They hesitated. Then my mom said, "Both." At least that was honest. We sat in silence for a long time. Finally, my mom said, "I don't know how to fix this." I exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of all the years of being second place. And I realized something. I didn't need them to fix it. I just needed them to understand it would never be the same. "I don't know either," I admitted. "But I do know this. I'm not going to be the one to fix it for you." My dad nodded, slow and understanding. My mom wiped at her eyes. What do we do now? I met her gaze. That's up to you. They thought an apology would be enough. But apologies don't erase years of being treated like an afterthought. This time, they had to prove they were willing to change. Apologies were easy. Change? That was the hard part. After my parents left that day, I didn't feel relieved. I didn't feel like anything had really been fixed. They had admitted their mistake. They had apologized. But I had heard apologies before. It was their actions that had always told a different story. And this time, I wasn't interested in words. I wanted proof. For the first time in my life, I didn't go out of my way to reach out first. I didn't text them good morning. I didn't send updates about my life. I didn't check in to see if they needed anything. For the first time, I made them do the work. And at first, nothing happened. Days passed, then a week, then two, and I thought, there it is. That's the proof I needed. If I wasn't the one putting in the effort, there was no effort at all. I should have known. I should have expected it. But somehow, it still hurt. It wasn't until the third week that things started to shift. It was a random Tuesday when my mom called. I let it go to voicemail. Then came a text. Mom. Hey, sweetheart. Just thinking about you. Hope you're doing okay. A part of me wanted to ignore it, to keep the distance. But another part of me, the part that had been waiting for any sign that they actually cared, hesitated. I didn't reply right away. Instead, I waited. The next day, my dad texted too. Dad, miss you, kid. Let's get dinner sometime. I stared at the message, emotions colliding inside me. Not because I was ready to let them back in, but because for the first time, they were trying. I agreed to dinner. Not because everything was forgiven. Not because I was ready to pretend like nothing had happened, but because I needed to see if they were serious. We met at a quiet restaurant. Just the three of us. Jake wasn't there. And that alone told me they had been paying attention. We sat down, and for the first time in years, my parents asked me about me. Not about Jake, not about work, not about whether I could help them with something. Just me. I wasn't sure if it was genuine, or if they were just trying to fix what was broken, but for the first time, they were actually listening. And that was new. Halfway through dinner, my mom cleared her throat. We've been thinking a lot about what you said, she said carefully, about how we've treated you. I took a sip of my water, staying silent. She continued. And we've realized that we've always assumed you didn't need us the way Jake did, that because you were strong and independent, we didn't have to put in as much effort. I met her gaze. And now? She swallowed. And now we know that was wrong. I glanced at my dad. He nodded. We see it now, Alyssa. We do. For a moment, I didn't know what to say, because those were the words I had been waiting for my whole life. And yet, part of me still didn't believe them. Not yet. By the time dinner ended, something had shifted. Not in a dramatic, everything is fixed way, but in a, maybe this time they actually mean it way. They still had a long way to go. But for once, they were the ones taking the first steps. And for now, that was enough. But words were still just words. And if they really wanted to fix things, they were going to have to prove it. Dinner had gone better than I expected. But I wasn't naive. I knew that one meal, one conversation, wasn't enough to undo years of being treated like an afterthought. I wasn't looking for a quick fix. I wasn't looking for another empty apology. If my parents truly wanted to change, they had to prove it. The first real test came a week later. It was my birthday. And if history had taught me anything, it was that birthdays in our family had never been fair. Jake's birthdays were always a big deal. Parties, gifts, dinner reservations at whatever fancy restaurant he wanted. Mine? A card. Maybe a phone call, if they remembered. So I told myself I wouldn't expect anything this year. I told myself I wouldn't care. And yet, when I woke up that morning, there was still a small part of me, the part that still wanted to believe they could change, that hoped. And this time, they didn't forget. At exactly 10 a.m., there was a knock on my door. I frowned, setting down my coffee. I wasn't expecting anyone. When I opened the door, I saw my mom and dad standing there, holding a cake. My breath caught. They had never done this before. "Happy birthday, sweetheart," my mom said, offering me a tentative smile. I blinked at them. "You remembered?" My dad let out a small chuckle. "Of course we did." And for once, I believed them. They didn't just drop off the cake and leave. They actually spent the day with me. We didn't do anything extravagant, just a quiet afternoon at my place, talking, catching up, eating cake that was a little too sweet, but still perfect because it was mine. There were no rushed goodbyes. No feeling like I was just an obligation. For the first time in a long time, it felt like they wanted to be there. And I didn't realize how much I had needed that until it actually happened. A few weeks later, they proved it again. I had a big presentation at work, something I had been nervous about for weeks. I had mentioned it briefly over dinner one night, not thinking much of it. But when the day came, I got a text from my mom. "Mom, thinking of you today. You're going to do great." And then one from my dad. "Dad, let us know how it goes, kiddo. Proud of you no matter what." I stared at my phone for a long moment. They had never done this before. I wasn't used to them remembering the little things. And yet, here they were. Trying. It wasn't perfect. There were still moments where old habits crept back in. Mom still occasionally defaulted to making excuses for Jake. Dad still struggled to express himself in more than a few words. But the difference? They caught themselves. They noticed when they messed up. And they tried to do better. And that mattered. One night, a few months later, my mom called me. Not for anything in particular, just to talk. And at some point in the conversation, she sighed. "I know it's going to take time," she said carefully, "for you to trust us again." I swallowed. "Yeah." A pause. Then, "We're not giving up, Alyssa. You're too important to us." I felt my throat tighten, because for the first time, I believed her. But for the first time in my life, I finally felt like I mattered. Change didn't happen overnight. There were still moments when I caught myself waiting for the other shoe to drop, for my parents to slide back into their old habits, for them to forget, to stop trying. But weeks passed, then months. And they kept showing up. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't effortless. But for the first time in my life, I finally felt like I mattered. One evening, I was sitting on my back porch, sipping tea, when my phone buzzed. It was Mom. Not an apology, not a guilt trip, just a simple text. "Mom, thinking of you. How's your week going?" I stared at the screen, something warm settling in my chest, because that message wouldn't have existed a year ago. A few weeks later, I got another surprise. I had been saving for a trip, a solo vacation, just for me. I hadn't told my family much about it, mostly because I didn't want to deal with their opinions. But then, one night at dinner, my dad asked, "So when's your trip?" I blinked. "You remember?" He smirked. "Of course. It's Italy, right?" My mom nodded. "We were actually talking about it the other day. Do you need help with anything? Packing? Planning?" I studied them carefully, waiting for some catch. But there wasn't one. They weren't offering because they wanted something in return. They were offering because they wanted to be part of my life. And that? That was new. The night before my flight, I got a text from Jake. I almost didn't open it. But curiosity won. "Jake, Mom won't say it, but she's freaking out about you traveling alone. You know how she is." I rolled my eyes. Typical. Then another message came through. "Jake, you're actually doing it, huh? Living your life on your own terms." I hesitated before replying. Me. "Yeah, I am." There was a long pause before his final message arrived. "Jake, that's kinda badass, sis." As I stepped off the plane in Rome, the weight of the last year settled on me. I had spent so much of my life waiting for my parents to see me, waiting for them to include me, waiting for the day when I wouldn't feel like an afterthought. But I wasn't waiting anymore. I was choosing myself. I had built a life where I didn't have to chase their approval. And somehow, in doing that, they had finally learned how to show up for me. A few days into my trip, I was sitting at a cafe when my phone buzzed. A group message. Mom, we just saw your latest photos. Rome looks amazing. Call us soon? We miss you. I smiled. Not because I needed their approval, but because, for the first time, they weren't just saying the words. They meant them. And for the first time in my life, that was enough. You shouldn't have to beg for love. You shouldn't have to fight to be included. And if the people around you don't see your worth, choose yourself. Because sometimes when you stop waiting to be seen, that's when they finally notice. Especially for you, my dear. My mother-in-law, Margaret, beamed as she placed the steaming mug in front of me. Her voice was sweet, almost too sweet, like honey masking something bitter. I smiled, though my stomach clenched. So sweet, I said, keeping my tone light. I wrapped my hands around the cup, feeling the warmth seep into my palms. But there was something off. The aroma rising from the cup wasn't the rich, comforting scent of freshly brewed coffee. It carried a strange, almost chemical-like tang, something metallic that tingled in the back of my throat before I even took a sip. Across the table, my husband Steve barely looked up from his phone, one arm draped over the back of his chair, his usual air of arrogance suffocating the space between us. "Drink up," Margaret chirped, her eyes twinkling. "I made it just the way you like it." She had never cared how I liked my coffee. For 7 years, I had sat at this table, enduring her constant condescension, her not-so-subtle digs, and her smothering influence over Steve. She had always been the quiet puppeteer, pulling the strings of my marriage, reinforcing my husband's belief that he was above me, that I was lucky to be with him, that he was doing me a favor. And Steve? He fed off her approval, a golden boy who could do no wrong in her eyes, while I was the outsider who could never measure up. My fingers tightened around the handle. I glanced at Steve. He didn't even notice the way his mother's eyes flicked toward my cup, the slight tension in her jaw as she waited. Why is she watching so closely? Then I remembered. This wasn't the first time something seemed off about what she had given me. 2 months ago, after a family dinner, I had spent the entire night curled in pain on the bathroom floor, my stomach cramping violently. Margaret had played the concerned mother-in-law role flawlessly. "Maybe you have a sensitive stomach, dear. Perhaps you should watch what you eat." And Steve? He had just rolled his eyes, blaming me for ruining the evening with my drama. Another time, it was an odd dizziness after tea at her house, my head swimming, my body feeling sluggish and uncooperative. Margaret had patted my hand. "Oh dear, maybe you're just dehydrated." And Steve had laughed, teasing me about not being able to handle a simple cup of tea. But now? Now she was watching too closely, waiting too intently. I felt my heartbeat quicken as my mind raced. "What is in this coffee?" Margaret's lips twitched, her expression carefully neutral. "She wants me to drink it. She expects me to drink it." A quiet, slow breath. Then, without hesitation, I shifted my mug closer to Steve's seat. I leaned forward, feigning interest in my phone, my fingers carefully wrapping around the handle of his coffee cup instead. Then, with a quick, deliberate movement, I switched the mugs. The ceramic barely made a sound against the tablecloth, my actions smooth, practiced, because I had learned to survive in this house by being careful. Steve didn't notice. He was still scrolling through his phone, his usual indifference on full display. I picked up the cup meant for him and took a slow sip. Black, no sugar. Just the way he always drank it. And Steve? He finally lifted his cup, the one Margaret had placed so carefully in front of me, and took a sip without a second thought. Margaret's smile faltered, just for a second, just a flicker of something in her eyes. Panic? Fear? Shock? Before she schooled her expression back into a pleasant, motherly mask. Steve, oblivious as ever, set the mug down, his fate sealed in a single, casual sip. And I watched. I waited. Steve sighed loudly, rubbing his temple as he scrolled through his phone, his usual arrogance still intact. The clock on the wall ticked steadily, marking each second since he had taken his first sip of coffee. Margaret's eyes darted toward him every few moments, her fingers curled tightly around the edge of the tablecloth. She wasn't watching me anymore. Her attention had shifted entirely to her son. I sat back, feigning ignorance, forcing a casual smile as I took another slow sip from Steve's cup. He exhaled sharply, his brow furrowing. "Something wrong, sweetheart?" I asked, keeping my voice even. He blinked a few times, rubbing his forehead. "I don't know. I just feel a little off." I took another sip of coffee, my pulse steady, my hands resting easily on the table. "Maybe you should drink some water." Margaret's nails dug into the tablecloth. Steve started, but his sentence broke off abruptly. He swallowed hard, shifting in his chair. Then, his face twisted slightly, his jaw clenching as though suppressing a sudden wave of nausea. The room grew unnervingly quiet. Margaret pushed her chair back suddenly, the legs scraping against the polished floor. "Steve, maybe you should lie down," she said quickly, too quickly, as though she already knew exactly what was happening. My chest tightened, but I kept my face neutral. He groaned softly, shaking his head. "No, His breathing grew heavier, beads of sweat forming along his hairline. His hand trembled slightly as he reached for his water glass, his fingers unsteady. I stared at him, the realization settling deep in my bones. She knew. She knew something was in that coffee. Margaret stood up abruptly, moving toward him as though she could physically pull him away from the situation she had created. "I'll get you something, honey," she said. "Maybe a cold cloth." She was panicking, not over concern for her son, but because she was losing control of the situation. Steve clenched his jaw, waving her off. "I just need a minute," he muttered, pinching the bridge of his nose. I leaned forward, watching Margaret carefully. "I don't understand," I said, feigning innocence. "Steve, you just drank the same coffee your mother made for me. If I'm fine, why aren't you?" Margaret froze. The blood drained from her face. Steve, still sluggish, didn't immediately react to my words. But Margaret! Her breathing changed. I don't know," she stammered. "Maybe he's coming down with something." "Coming down with something?" I stared at her, my mind piecing everything together in a way that suddenly made my stomach turn. How many times had I been coming down with something over the last few years? How many times had I spent nights curled in pain, feeling like my body was betraying me, while Steve and Margaret looked on without an ounce of concern? But now it was him. Steve wiped his face, his movement slower, his skin paler. He muttered something under his breath and stood up too fast. The moment he pushed himself away from the table, his body swayed unsteadily. His chair scraped loudly against the floor as he stumbled forward, grabbing onto the edge of the counter for balance. "Whoa," he muttered. "What the hell is going on?" Margaret was already moving, already trying to regain control. "Sweetheart, just sit down, I'll—" "No," I interrupted, my voice firm. "Let's call a doctor." Both of them froze. Steve shook his head, blinking rapidly. "It's nothing. I just need a second." He doesn't even realize how bad it is yet. Margaret's breathing had turned shallow. I could see the fear in her eyes now, full and undeniable. She didn't just look worried. She looked caught. And that's when I knew. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't a bad batch of coffee or a coincidence. Margaret had done something to that drink, and Steve? He was just now feeling what I had felt over and over again. The betrayal, the confusion, the sickness creeping through his body, slow at first, then undeniable. My heart pounded in my chest, but I forced my expression to remain calm. I pushed my chair back and stood up. "I'll call an ambulance," I said. Steve waved me off again, but I saw it. The slight panic in his eyes, the way he wasn't in control anymore. Margaret shot forward, gripping his arm. No, there's no need for that." I turned my gaze to her, and that's when I smiled. "Why not?" I asked softly. She flinched. She opened her mouth to respond, but I saw it in her eyes. She didn't have an answer. Because Margaret had spent years making me feel helpless, like I was imagining things, like I was weak. But I wasn't the weak one now. I folded my arms, tilting my head slightly. "Unless, of course," I said slowly, watching her expression darken. "There's a reason you don't want a doctor to examine him." The room fell silent. Margaret stared at me, and for the first time in all the years I had known her, she looked afraid of me. Margaret's fear was palpable, her fingers twitching at her sides as she tried to maintain control over the situation. But it was slipping through her grasp. Fast. Steve was getting worse by the second. His normally upright posture had weakened, his shoulders slumping forward, and his breathing was labored. He gritted his teeth, gripping the counter as if he were holding on to the last bit of stability he had left. But still, he refused to believe it. "I don't need a doctor," he muttered, his voice tight. Just give me a minute." I raised an eyebrow, folding my arms across my chest. "Steve, you can barely stand. I'm calling an ambulance." I pulled my phone from my pocket, my fingers hovering over the screen. Margaret lunged. She reached across the table, gripping my wrist with surprising force. "There's no need," she said quickly, her voice a touch too desperate now. I didn't react immediately. Instead, I studied her. Really studied her. Her breathing was uneven, her pupils were dilated. She was shaking, not from worry, but from pure, unfiltered panic. I met her gaze and spoke slowly. "What did you put in his coffee, Margaret?" The color drained from her face. Steve's head snapped up, his glassy eyes locking onto his mother. She hesitated. That hesitation alone was enough. Steve exhaled sharply, finally registering what I had been suggesting all along. His own mother had done something to him. Margaret shook her head, her mouth opening and closing, trying to come up with a way to twist the situation, to manipulate, to lie her way out. But it was too late. I wasn't the naive, obedient daughter-in-law anymore. I yanked my wrist from her grasp and hit call on my phone. Margaret's panic turned to rage. Her hands slammed onto the table as she leaned forward. "Olivia, stop this! You're making a scene over nothing!" My lips curled into a slow, knowing smile. "Funny, isn't it?" I said. "That's exactly what Steve used to say to me when I was the one feeling sick." Steve stiffened. The words hit him like a slap, like something he had never truly considered before. Margaret's head jerked toward him, her mouth twisting into something almost desperate. "Sweetheart," she soothed, "she's overreacting. You're just exhausted. Let's get you to bed." Steve flinched away from her. For the first time, his mother's touch repulsed him. He didn't trust her anymore. I don't." His voice faltered, his body still fighting against whatever she had given him. But he knew. He knew. The realization settled over him like a thick fog, the weight of it pressing down, suffocating him. I stepped closer, my voice soft but firm. "You don't feel right, do you?" Steve shook his head, his arrogance gone. His breathing had become shallower, his hands unsteady. The phone rang in my hand. Margaret's entire body went rigid. A voice crackled through the speaker. 911. What's your emergency?" Before Margaret could jerk forward and try to stop me again, I turned my back on her, stepping away. "I need an ambulance," I said, loud and clear, making sure every single word was heard. Steve sagged against the counter, his weight shifting unsteadily. He was fighting to stay upright now. Margaret's world was crashing down around her. I could hear her sharp, frantic breathing behind me, but I didn't turn around. I was done being afraid of her. "This is Olivia Bennett," I continued. "My husband drank something at his mother's house, and now he's having trouble breathing, feels weak, and is sweating excessively. I believe—" I paused, letting my words sink in. "I believe he was poisoned." There it was. The truth. Raw, exposed, irrefutable. Margaret collapsed into her chair, a breathless gasp escaping her lips. She wasn't in control anymore. A long silence filled the room. Then Steve, still unsteady, his voice hoarse, finally spoke. "Mom!" His voice shook, with betrayal, with confusion, with disbelief. "What the hell did you do to me?" Margaret didn't answer, because there was nothing left to say. The sirens started wailing in the distance, and I smiled, because for the first time in years, Margaret was finally powerless. The wail of sirens grew louder, cutting through the thick tension in the room. Margaret sat frozen in her chair, her hands clenched into fists on the table. Her once perfectly composed demeanor had crumbled, replaced with something raw and desperate. Steve, pale and sweating through his shirt, sat slumped against the counter. His breath was coming in short, uneven gasps now, his body clearly struggling against whatever was in his system. I stood between them, my phone still in my hand, my heart pounding steadily in my chest. It was happening. Years of humiliation, manipulation, gaslighting, years of being told I was weak, that I was imagining things, that I was being dramatic. And now, reality was hitting Steve like a freight train. The man who had spent years belittling me, dismissing my pain, siding with his mother against me, was now looking at her with something close to horror. The first flicker of doubt, the first time he was forced to see her for what she truly was. And that realization terrified him. The flashing red and blue lights cut through the window as the ambulance skidded to a stop outside. Margaret's head snapped up. "No!" she whispered. I turned toward her, calm, steady, ready. "This is happening," I said simply. She shook her head, her eyes darting between me and her son, as if she could still somehow fix this, as if she could still control it. She stood abruptly, her chair screeching against the floor. "Listen to me, Olivia," she hissed, her voice sharp with desperation. "If you don't say anything, if you tell them it was just a misunderstanding, then—" "Then what?" I cut her off, my voice even. "Then you'll get to keep doing this? Keep getting away with it?" Her lips parted, but no words came out. She didn't have an answer, because she knew, deep down she knew. This wasn't the first time. And Steve? He knew it now, too. I turned back to him, watching the way his face contorted with realization. I didn't have to spell it out for him. All the times I had been sick, all the times he had laughed it off, all the times his mother had played innocent while I suffered. He knew. And that knowledge was crushing him. The paramedics burst through the front door, two of them rushing toward Steve. Margaret staggered back, pressing herself against the wall, as if she could disappear into it. "What's his condition?" One of the paramedics asked me, his voice urgent. "He's dizzy, sweating, disoriented," I said. "It started about an hour ago, right after he drank his coffee." One of them immediately began checking Steve's vitals, while the other prepped a stretcher. "What's in the coffee?" the second paramedic asked, already assessing the situation. My eyes locked onto Margaret. She didn't move, didn't blink, didn't breathe. Slowly, I turned back to the paramedic. "I don't know," I said, my voice deliberately loud. "But his mother made it, specifically for me." That was it. That was all I had to say. Because the second those words left my mouth, Margaret's entire body went rigid. One of the paramedics turned toward her. "Ma'am, is that true?" She didn't answer. I watched as she struggled to find a way out, to lie, to twist the truth, to manipulate, but there was no way out, not this time. Steve, his voice hoarse, his body weak, finally spoke. His next words would change everything. "Mom!" He swallowed hard. "What did you do to me?" Margaret flinched, as if he had slapped her. The paramedics were already lifting Steve onto the stretcher. One of them turned to me. He needs to be transported immediately. Are you riding with him? I didn't hesitate. Yes. Margaret stepped forward, a last desperate attempt to grasp some sliver of control. Wait. I turned to her, my expression unreadable. You should probably get a lawyer, I said. Then I walked out the door, leaving her standing there, helpless. The hospital smelled sterile, a mix of antiseptic and something metallic that clung to the air. The beeping of machines filled the space around us, each sound a reminder of how close Steve had come to something irreversible. I sat in the corner of the emergency room, watching as the doctors worked around him, checking his vitals, running tests, asking questions. Steve lay still, his skin pale, his body weak from whatever had been in that coffee. But his eyes were open now, and for the first time in years, they were looking at me, really looking at me. Not with indifference, not with arrogance, but with something else entirely. Something that looked a lot like guilt. A doctor approached, his expression unreadable as he flipped through a chart. Mr. Bennett, your test results show elevated levels of a toxic compound often found in prescription sedatives. We're lucky you didn't ingest more. Steve swallowed hard. The doctor turned to me. You mentioned his mother made the coffee? I nodded. Yes. She made it for me, but Steve drank it instead. The doctor's expression darkened. We'll need to report this to the authorities. Cases like this don't just get ignored. Steve closed his eyes. His fingers clenched into fists against the hospital sheets. He knew the consequences were coming. The doctor gave me a small nod before walking away, leaving the two of us in thick, suffocating silence. And then, finally, Steve spoke. I didn't know. I let out a breath, leaning back against the chair. Didn't you? His jaw tensed. I didn't expect him to admit it. I didn't expect him to apologize. Steve wasn't the kind of man who apologized, but for the first time, he couldn't meet my eyes. The silence between us stretched long, heavy, years in the making. How long? I asked quietly. His head turned slightly, brow furrowing. What? I kept my voice calm, measured, unshaken. How long have you known that something wasn't right? That things weren't normal? Steve hesitated, and then his face broke. Just a flicker of something. Recognition. Regret. I knew that look, because deep down he had always known. Maybe not in clear, undeniable terms. Maybe not in something he would say out loud. But he had seen the patterns. He had noticed the way I was always the one getting sick. He had watched me suffer and convinced himself it was a coincidence. Because to admit otherwise, to admit that his own mother was capable of this, that would mean accepting that he had failed to protect me. And Steve never liked admitting when he was wrong. His lips parted, then closed again, as if he wanted to say something, needed to say something. But what could he say? That he was sorry? That he wished he had listened? That he regretted choosing his mother's comfort over my safety? None of it mattered now. I sighed, looking toward the window, the city lights blinking in the distance. You always took her side. Steve flinched, just slightly. You thought I was overreacting, that I was dramatic, that I made things up for attention. I shook my head. You never believed me. His breathing was uneven now. Olivia! No. My voice was firm, steady. You don't get to say my name like that anymore. His face twisted, but he didn't argue. Because he knew I was right. The door opened, and a nurse stepped inside. Mr. Bennett, a detective is here to speak with you. Steve stiffened. This was it. The unraveling of everything he had ignored. Everything he had chosen to overlook. And this time, there was no escaping the truth. The door to Steve's hospital room swung open, and in walked Detective Harper, a middle-aged woman with sharp eyes and an air of quiet authority. She carried a notebook in one hand, a voice recorder in the other, and the weight of inevitable consequences on her shoulders. Steve barely lifted his head. He looked defeated, his body weakened by whatever Margaret had put in his coffee. The coffee meant for me. I stayed seated in the corner, my arms crossed, my heartbeat steady. "Mr. Bennett," Detective Harper greeted, her tone clipped, professional. "I understand you suffered a reaction to something in your drink." Steve swallowed, his Adam's apple bobbing. He looked at me first. Not at the detective, not at the wall, but at me, like he was waiting for permission, like he still thought I was the one who would protect him. I held his gaze, unflinching. For years, he had watched his mother slowly destroy me and had done nothing. And now? Now, he was in my position. Except I wasn't going to save him. I raised an eyebrow, waiting. Steve turned back to the detective, his jaw tightening. "Yeah," he muttered. "Something was off about the coffee." The detective nodded, flipping open her notebook. "Your wife informed us that your mother prepared the coffee specifically for her, that you drank it by mistake. Is that correct?" Silence. A long, painful silence. Steve was caught between the truth and the lie. The truth meant betraying his mother. The lie meant betraying himself. Finally, he exhaled. "Yeah, that's right." Detective Harper wrote something down. "Has this happened before?" Another silence. I tilted my head slightly, daring him. "Lie, Steve. Say it's the first time. Say it's just a mistake. Say you had no idea." His fingers twitched on the blanket. He knew I wouldn't let him get away with it. Not this time. His mother had gotten away with too much already. He ran a hand down his face. "I don't know," he muttered. "I mean, Olivia's been sick before, but I thought—" I let out a quiet laugh, shaking my head. "You thought what, Steve?" I asked. "That I was imagining it? That it was all in my head?" His face darkened with shame. He knew. I knew he knew. Detective Harper's gaze sharpened. "Mr. Bennett, your medical records show no pre-existing conditions that would explain your reaction. Your wife, however, has had multiple emergency room visits over the past few years with similar symptoms. Do you understand what I'm implying?" Steve didn't respond. Because this was the moment. The moment where he had to decide who he was going to protect. Himself? Or the mother who had tried to poison me? The mother who had succeeded for years? I sat forward, my voice even. "You knew something was wrong. You always knew. But you ignored it because it wasn't happening to you." Steve's breathing was shaky. I kept going. "Every time I got sick, every time I sat in a hospital bed like you are now, you told me it was nothing. You laughed at me. You made me think I was crazy." I leaned closer, my voice like steel. "But now? Now, you believe me." Steve closed his eyes. He had nothing to say. Because I was right. Detective Harper didn't let the moment linger. She snapped her notebook shut. "We'll need to speak with your mother. Officers are already en route to her house. If she tries to leave, she'll be taken into custody." Margaret, the puppet master, the woman who had ruled my marriage, whispering poison into Steve's ear just as she had poisoned me. But now she was caught. "Mr. Bennett, do you want to press charges?" Steve hesitated, and for the first time in our marriage, he turned to me. Like I had the answer. Like I should be the one to decide. And maybe, once upon a time, I would have protected him. But I wasn't that woman anymore. I stood, smoothing down my jacket. "That's not my call, detective," I said. "It's Steve's." He looked at me, pleading, regretful, weak. I gave him nothing. The detective nodded. "We'll be back with more questions once we have her in custody. In the meantime, Mr. Bennett, I'd suggest you think very carefully about your next steps." She turned on her heel and walked out. I followed, not bothering to look back, not bothering to wait for Steve's excuses, his guilt, his empty apologies. Because the moment I walked out that door, I knew something with absolute certainty. I wasn't coming back. Margaret might have been the one putting something in my coffee. But Steve? Steve had been letting her do it. And that? That was unforgivable. As I stepped into the hallway, my phone buzzed. A text from my lawyer. I smiled. Because this wasn't just the end of a poisoning plot. This was the end of my marriage.